We have got a list of all-star cast with us this afternoon about this very important topic. So I was just going to introduce them really quickly, and then we'll move through the rest of the program. We'll try to get as close to the hour as we can so that everybody can get their full CLEs, but we'll rely on a lot of questions. So as we go through, you guys keep your questions close at hand, and we'll take some questions at the very end. So I'm Nicole Cottle, and I was just talking with the panel here. I've been on the Utah Land Use Institute board. I've had the very fortunate opportunity to be with that group for a while. I can't remember how long. Craig's going to have to tell me, but I can remember meetings in this room when we first started this conference where there was a great and very high and significant level of hostility. And some of you that have been here and have been around a long time, those early conferences were something else. And I think as we started this, and what a great thing that Craig and the group have put together so that we can come together as people responsible for building community in Utah and recognize that we're partners together. And as I sat in the audience today, I thought to myself, this is really amazing that we're at this place where, while we don't all agree, for sure, and I think we'd agree every city and community is different. I think we'd agree that every development situation is different, and things are hard right now, that we can have these great conversations and recognize that neither group can do these community building activities without each other. And I would also say one other thing that crossed my mind today was we've had a lot of discussion about affordability and making sure we have housing for our families and for those that are coming here. And I just want to take a minute and recognize what an actually great problem that is. Actually, from a Utah perspective, from a city perspective, the fact that people want to be here, they want to bring their businesses here, they want to have jobs here, it's not always like that. And some of you probably remember years where things were leaner and economic development wasn't quite as big a success, and that housing wasn't quite as big of an issue, and that the market wasn't quite as hot. Now, hopefully we can find some homeostasis in that, but I think it's a good problem. And fortunately, we're in a place where we can do this the Utah way and solve many of the things that we talked about today. I actually just recently retired from West Valley City, where I was mostly engaged in land use, redevelopment, economic development for about 25 years. And Wilf here on the board, which we'll talk about in just a minute on the panel here, I'll tell you about him in just a minute. He needs no introduction, but I'll give one anyway. We were just joking, and he said, well, what is your take on accessory dwelling units? And we laughed for a minute, and I said, mine is quite a bit different, I bet, than most of the people in this room, because the community that I served for 25 years is quite a bit different than most of the communities in this room. And in our community there in West Valley, there were a lot of already intergenerational families living together in single-family homes and otherwise. And we had, for quite a long time, a lot of different ADUs already in existence. Probably not exactly legal or exactly built like what we're going to talk about today, but I can tell you that I have seen them all. I've seen all types of accessory dwelling units. And do I think that they solve a problem that we have today? Yes. And do I think that they're probably quickest to market to solve a problem? Yes. I will tell you, much like Jody Hoffman just prior expressed, the one thing that I would say from my 25 years of experience is, first, I think we need to remember that when you put a housing unit in the ground, any kind of housing unit, doesn't matter what kind, that is a 100-year piece of build, at least, right? You very rarely redevelop housing. I had the opportunity to do that in West Valley. It was very rare, and really no one was doing it. It's very difficult, and you have to be really careful about what you put in the ground. So caution is good. The other thing that I would say from my experience with regards to things like this is, while we have a problem before us today, And clearly what we're going to talk about today is potentially one of the most significant and important solutions. We are also all concerned, not just the municipal folks in the room, but also our development partners are concerned about livability of communities and sustainability of the quality of life that we have here in Utah, because it matters not just for how your neighborhood feels, it matters how our marketplace functions. It matters for the long-term economic success of this state. And keeping that in mind as well when we talk about building cheaper homes, when we talk about building modular homes or homes made somewhere else and constructed. Those things can all be done in a great way, and they can all be integrated into communities in a really wonderful and creative way. I believe that. I've seen that happen. And they can help us solve a problem. But we need to be on guard because of the things that I mentioned before, and because I've had this unique experience to see what happens if it's not very delicately handled. So with that, I would love to introduce this awesome panel who really you're all here to hear. And like I said, an all-star cast. I think that Craig and the group were brilliant in keeping this to last, because we really have the all-star cast with this. I'll start with Annalisa Wilson. She is the general counsel for Ivory Homes. She went to BYU Law School and graduated in 2011. And then she spent about 7 years in commercial and otherwise litigation at Curtin and McConkie. They made her a shareholder there, and then Ivory Homes scooped her right up. I don't even know how fast that was, but it looked really fast to me. So Ivory Homes, as you know, is a stalwart development partner in our community. They've been around a long, long time and often are, if not every year, close to every year, one of the #1 home builders in our state. Wonderful development partners and community builders. And we're just lucky to have Annalisa with us today and look forward to her commentary. We also have Mayor Johnson. Mayor Johnson is the mayor of Lehigh, and as many of you are aware, and some of I know the sister cities that are right next to Lehigh are here. I see them today. That's the place to be in Lehigh. Everybody is watching what Lehigh is doing, and I think the mayor and city council have just done a stellar job of making that city the place that really people want to be, and it's right in the epicenter of all the action right now. So look forward to Mayor Johnson's experience. There in Lehigh have had very particular and interesting experience with ADUs, and Mayor Johnson has some very valuable experience there to share with us. And of course we have Wilf Summercorn at the end here, and Wilf also works with the Utah Land Use Institute, but so much more. And he, as you all know, doesn't really need introduction, but generations of experience in land use. He is also our guru right now. If you don't follow him and watch his blog, you should hop on and catch that. You can get to that through the Utah Land Use Institute website. He writes lovely, almost daily, maybe not quite, but it will be. It gets close to daily during the session. But at least weekly, I would say, really insightful and very thoughtful updates on what's happening in Utah, what the legislature is doing, interesting topics as it relates to all kinds of things with regards to land use. And again, very happy to have Wilf on the panel today as well. So we're going to start with just a little bit of introduction from each of our panelists themselves, and we'll have Mayor Johnson start off, and then Annalisa, and then Wilf, and then I have a few questions that I'd like to guide the panel through, and then we'll open up to questions to the group. Okay.
Thank you, Nicole. Actually, I'd rather just have you come up and keep talking about Lehigh City, because that'd make it a lot easier on me, but I appreciate the introduction. It is true that, in my opinion, Lehigh City is the happening city, I think is how you put it, right? So we do have a lot of going on. We've had significant growth. I moved into Lehigh City in '93. We had a population of 9,000 people at that time, and right now we're right about 90,000 people. So that indicates how rapid our growth is. And we have a lot of citizens, as many of you are probably aware, who just really hate growth and think we're handling it right things the wrong way, but we actually think growth is pretty important thing to address, and we believe we've done a pretty good job of handling that. In regards to the ADU, I did present a few slides. I'd like to say I've got 2-hour presentation here, and I've trimmed it down to 1 hour and 45 minutes, so I hope that's okay. Nobody even laughed at that. That was a joke, by the way. Annalisa had mentioned, she's seen this portion of this presentation. She says, "You've got a long presentation, please don't give it all." So I've trimmed it down to 4 slides here. 4 of the more controversial slides, let me put it that way. But we've kept a lot of data in Lehigh City over probably the last 40 years. We've had the same city engineer involved. He's been very concerned about the state laws in regards to the standard of care and what needs to be delivered as the city grows in regards to infrastructure. So we got the benefit of that data. And as I've communicated to a lot of other cities, I realize they may not have the same data we've got. But we've been able to rely on that on some information. Lehigh City did not have legal ADUs until I think 2018. We changed things around. That's when I became mayor, and we started making those legal. And because we were having illegal ones pop up, we decided it was very important. You could have mother-in-law apartments. That's different. If you were going to have a rental in your basement, you were becoming a business owner. And as a business owner, there were certain regulations you had to follow, like any other type of business that might be created in these United States. And so we asked them to get inspections, make sure that these were true apartments, make sure that the landlords understood the rules, that they couldn't be an invasive landlord on the renters, and there's rules they had to follow. We also asked them to pay impact fees to help deal with the increased demand that was going to happen along the line. So real quick, this is just a little bit of the data that we have. So what we've learned, let me just say this, in 82, the state, 3 years ago in House Bill 82, the state legislature passed a law and they said, well, we need ADUs because these homes were built for 6 people and now there's only an empty nester couple living in upstairs and there's gonna be 1 or 2 people living in the basement. We wasn't sure that data, so we've taken the time, we've actually polled those that are living in the apartments we know, and this is how we've calculated the demand on those. So right now, this is from census data since 2011. The average family size you can see in that top bar, the average number of occupants that's actually living in the home is a little bit less. You can see it runs somewhere between 3.6 and 3.9. Our design calculation to calculate how many ERUs are planned in all areas of town, we've used 3.5 consistently in all that time. These homes were not built for 6 people per home because that isn't what the data showed. That's important, I think, to understand, because in our calculations, we've kept our what we can deliver from an ERU standpoint pretty tight. Okay, here's another interesting piece of information. This also came out of our poll. We've learned that the types of renters that live in these now, and this is up to date, this is even since 82 and the laws have changed, we have only 1 individual living in about 24% of the units. We have family with children living in 23, and where 2 or more unrelated individuals, generally, you know, students and that sort of thing, 53%. So we're well over that 1 to 2 threshold on the number of people that are living in these. Next slide. This is something that has become a very big concern. And I know in California, they don't worry about this because their law that is similar to 82 that they passed in the late 1980s, they didn't really consider parking, so a lot of those renters park on the streets. We cannot do that in Utah. I don't know about your cities. I can tell you about my city. I think I'm pretty familiar with Draper and those who live in hillside communities. We cannot have parking in the wintertime on the streets. And state legislators said, well, we'll allow parking for 1 vehicle. We've found out in reality those numbers are quite different. Most rentals have an additional 2 cars. Some have 1 car. You can see there's very few that have 0, but there's also some that have 3 cars. And we are estimating, because we don't have the data, we believe that there's 2 to 3 cars in the upstairs house. So generally speaking, what we're finding is most of the homes are having up to 5 vehicles per home, and there's nowhere to park those cars except for in the street in the wintertime. And that's a concern. And we're not I want to make it clear, we're not against ADUs. We have to make sure that we can manage them correctly, manage the circumstance that comes from the demand of these, water, sewer, that sort of thing. But we also have to consider parking, because in the wintertime, they cannot park on the street or they will get hit. Okay, in summary, 4th slide. I told you I just reduced these significantly. So Annalise, I want you to recognize this. I'm down to 4 slides. It's a lot different than the last time you've seen this presentation. These have become our critical issues, okay? Increased traffic, by the way, is not as concerned. We thought the traffic infrastructure would be hit significantly, and we found in few cases has the level of service dropped to a level of service F. Now, a lot of your citizens get upset if they have to wait an extra 15 seconds at a traffic light. I get it. But it's not a significant problem. It can be, but it hasn't been for Lehigh. On-street parking, I mentioned, that's a critical issue. Culinary water rights and culinary water source and culinary water storage. These are critical issues for us. If we increase our ADUs up to 10% in our city, our water tanks do not have the capacity. We do not have water rights available, and the water sources that we have available are disappearing rapidly. We can't buy any from CUP, and they're running really low. And our well sources, the water sources we're hitting now they're not culinary grade, so that's a problem for us. Sewer capacity is a significant critical issue. At 10% additional ADUs in our community, we have located several locations where our sewers are going to surcharge, and we're not going to know where the problem's really coming from. We're just going to know where the problem is at, and that's a serious problem for cities. Now, I'm just going to say this really quick, and then I'll close from this and pass it on. We're not concerned about dealing with the growth. We have done our best to do that, and we think we can continue to do that. What we're concerned about is not being able to address the growth that comes, or the infrastructure growth that is necessitated by the growth and the addition of ADUs. So, like it or not, the statistics we found are pretty clear. We're going to continue to study this issue. We want to help with a solution, but there's things that are going to happen. There's going to have to be some kind of impact fees applied, because somebody has to pay for additional sewer lines run, somebody has to pay for additional water tanks, and we have to find additional water sources. That being said, I'll look forward to your questions, and I'll turn it over to whoever's next.
Thanks, Mark. I didn't mean to put pressure on you to really get your slides down. You did a great job. And I appreciate Lehigh has put a lot of effort into studying this, and I appreciate Lehigh is a great city for development, truly. And I don't have any slides. I thought about bringing slides, and I even used one of those AI generators to, I said, create me a slide presentation about all the benefits of ADUs. And it did pretty well, but the first slide, it had the title and then this picture of a hairy chest with a gold chain. And I don't know what it thought ADU stood for, but I don't think it was accessory dwelling units. So I did not bring those slides with me today. So I will just give you my counterpoint to Mark's presentation. We were reminded over lunch about the importance of disagreeing professionally and with civility. So I will say I do disagree with some of the data that Lehigh City has, but I think overall we do agree that we can be great partners when it comes to solutions for growth. when I heard this more detailed presentation previously, I was really interested in trying to find examples of where infrastructure had been overloaded by internal accessory dwelling units. That, as I understand, is the main concern from Lehigh City. And so I looked across the nation. ADUs are a very popular form of housing solution, so I thought surely I'd be able to find at least one example where this had happened, and I came up empty-handed. So then I went to Ivory Innovations, who's housed up at the University of Utah. It's a nonprofit. They have an advisory board with experts at educational institutions across the nation. So I asked them, said, have you ever heard of this happening? Can you give me an example of where infrastructure was overloaded by internal accessory dwelling units? They couldn't find anything. I did hear back from a woman named Celeste Goyer. She's the CEO of the Casita Coalition. It's a think tank in California that all they do is focus on all things ADUs. And in response to my question, she said, no, we've never seen that happen, especially with decreasing household sizes, even in areas of California with very old infrastructure. We have not seen any measurable impact of internal ADUs on that infrastructure. So as I understand Lehigh's concerns as it relates to this one issue, there are two assumptions that I disagree with. And the first one is that every ADU will have both a family in the main house and in that internal ADU as well. And maybe we don't disagree as much as I thought on that point. I thought that I hadn't seen the census data before. I believe those slides were new. And that was really helpful. And I actually think that that supports what my intuition was telling me, which is neighborhoods have cycles. And sometimes you do have a lot of young families. You have other neighborhoods where there are very few young families. Unfortunately for my children, I live in one of the latter. In fact, we're battling just to keep our neighborhood elementary school open. And so in neighborhoods like that, ADUs are a no-brainer, and it's also a no-brainer that they would not have a lot of impact given that those structures already exist. Those toilets are already flushing on that infrastructure. I did find an interesting study by the Turner Institute. They're out of Berkeley, and they found that in the Bay Area, 51% of ADUs were being occupied by family members or friends of the occupant. I think that supports the slide the mayor had about how, about 24% maybe these are single people, and then the other vast majority of that is maybe a young couple or student. These are the type of people who are seeking ADUs for rentals. So it's likely not going to be two families that are putting that type of a burden on infrastructure. The second assumption that I take some pause at that Lehigh has is and you didn't go into this much detail, Mark, but as I understand the way that these numbers are calculated is that it's assuming that all of the entitled units in Lehigh, which again, correct me, I should probably just turn the mic back over to you when I'm done, Mayor. But there's about 1,600, is that about right? Entitled units?
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. If I understand your question right, either entitled, fully entitled, or partially entitled, we actually have 15,000 units in Lehigh.
15,000. Okay,
right.
Well, I was way off. 15,000 units. And as I understand the way that the data was processed to get to these critical issues is that there's an assumption that each one of those units, that new construction, would contain an IADU. And based on what we're seeing in the market, that's not a reasonable assumption. It's certainly the case that the best time to build an IADU is when you create new construction. That's going to be the least expensive time. You're building the house anyway. You might as well just add that second kitchen and create the possibility of an IADU in the future. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of buyers bite on that. In a recent meeting, Jason Harris from Fieldstone was there, and you might have seen advertised, have this product that they're trying to advocate for, they're marketing for. Specifically, it's a Home Plus. It has an IADU built into it. And I believe it's in Saratoga that they're building this development that was specifically targeted to be built with IADUs. And he said they only have about 15 to 20% of buyers that do want to make that investment and build the IADU at the time that they're building the home. So that's even when that's the purpose of the development, it's not happening. And unfortunately at Ivory, it's even lower. I had our architecture department go back and pull all of our building permit packets for single family homes that we've done in the past 12 months. And in that time, they said that we've processed 541 single home packets. And of those, only 13 buyers elected to put a kitchen or a kitchenette in the basement that could be used as an IADU. So if you do the math, that's 2.4% of new homes that are being built have this IADU in them. So the assumption that there would be every new home would have an IADU just because it is now allowed under SB 174. If you're not familiar with that, last session, the legislature passed a bill that allowed for internal ADUs to be allowed in any plat, any home built on a plat that was recorded after October 1st, 2021. So again, the policy decision behind that is this is the best time to outfit homes with those IADUs is at the time that they're being built. So that's why the state said this is our opportunity, we should do it now, let's allow them anywhere in cities if the plat was recorded after this date. And the reality is it's just there hasn't been the uptick in the market where buyers want to make that investment at this time. And then finally, just as a practical matter, I think that I think as all of our intuition will tell us, adding one fixture, a kitchen sink, doesn't have a significant impact in the existing infrastructure. And the benefits certainly outweigh whatever that one fixture is going to cause. And certainly I think that if it's an external ADU, that's an entirely different conversation, and there likely would be an impact to the infrastructure if you're building an entire new housing unit. But if it's an internal ADU, I don't believe that impact fees are appropriate, especially if you think, just as an aside, impact fees are charged as a result of the impact from development activity. And what I'm hearing, this concern really isn't about the development activity. The development activity has been approved. The house is going to be built. And adding that kitchen sink isn't the concern. It's not the second kitchen sink, it's the perceived number of people that will be living in the home. And so really it's charging a fee based on perceived household population size and not the development activity. And I'm not sure that that's contemplated by the current Utah Impact Fee Act. But I'll save my comments on the benefits for questions because I think I've been going for a while. I'll turn it over to Wilf.
Well, I think I'll just stay here because I'm not billed as being on this panel, but Nicole used our past relationship and she said, you need to be on this panel. So I am here. The perspective, I guess, to bring to this is in the planning world, amongst planners for a number of years now, the maxim, the ethos has been ADUs are an easy way to add to the housing supply in a community without a significant impact. And the rationale for that is that ADUs are frequently built in homes that at one time probably had a larger number of people living in them. A family, a number of other people. And then as the owners downsize, they're looking for maybe either due to the fact that they don't like being alone, or this may be a way to help them financially so they can stay in the home. They do an ADU. It adds a couple more people at most into the home. May not even be up to the number that was living there when there was a family there. And so it's an easy way to accommodate some of those additional dwelling units, the living spaces that are needed for those who are finding it difficult to find those elsewhere, without a lot of significant impact, if any significant impact on the community. That's been the general maxim that's out there. And I find it kind of hard to dispute, especially when I look around my own neighborhood and other places. At one time, we had some pretty big families living in our neighborhood, and they're all gone, and now you have, if people are bringing in one or two others, there's still fewer people in the neighborhood probably than there were when it was at its height with huge families living in them. So, so that's one explanation, or I guess one rationale for why ADUs are a way to handle this. I have heard a little bit more, the infrastructure issue coming up in some other places. I don't know, I haven't seen the numbers, kind of like what the mayor just presented. And I find it interesting. Mayor, and I'm just curious. On your chart, you showed that your services, your utility base was projected to be for the 3.5, and yet your census is showing that right from the get-go, you were higher than that. How come you only planned at 3.5 if your census was already higher than that?
That's a real good question, and I can try to explain
Yeah,
that.
okay. I'm just curious. I mean, I'm just wondering, I'm like, why is that and that? And then, if that was certainly the case, what you're saying makes sense. But I just wonder why that was the case, why the numbers turned out that way. There's no question that rationale of ADUs, the term that was being used during the legislative session and before the legislative session, when the provision was put into place to allow for IADUs, was this is low-hanging fruit. This is an easy way to provide some additional dwelling units and dwelling space in our communities without incurring a lot of additional cost and impact. And so that was the maxim, that was the word that was out there, and it was a relatively easy pass. I will tell you from my own experience as a planner, some neighborhoods are very open to the idea and others are not. When I was at Salt Lake City, this was before this happened at the legislature, we attempted to, Paul will remember this probably, we attempted to change the city's ordinances to allow for ADUs all around the city. As we were then went, as part of our effort to discuss and engage the community, we went around to the various neighborhoods and communities and talked to them about it. Some of them were very open to the idea. Some of them were very accommodating, and others were not. They were dead set against it. What was the difference? I can tell you a big part of the difference was the income. The higher income areas were not for it. The lower income areas were okay with it. And I don't know if you had a similar experience maybe like that in West Valley City, Nicole, but it's just interesting to see how that's perceived, how it's received. And the other thing that we found interesting was when you look around, when you really get looking at neighborhoods, there are already so many ADUs in existence in a number of locations, just not legal by using that term. It's either done by family members living there or some people that have already begun doing the rental process and they just do it, and they don't really bother to check if that's something that's allowed or not. And the impact is generally so low, most people don't even notice that it's happening. So that's kind of been the explanation, the understanding of ADUs, but I think we're gonna face some more issues with regard to it. Particularly as I've kind of heard a little bit that the legislature may possibly look at making it legal to have just ADUs in general, not just internal ADUs. I don't know whether that'll really go anywhere, but that's something that I know has been at least mentioned in the past. So
You see why I invited Wilf onto this panel today. So happy he's with us. Okay, so let's talk about, if we can, just for a second, let's separate the two types of ADUs. Well, there are lots of types, but let's do internal and external for just a minute. And I wanted to ask first a question of the panel about internal ADUs. So with regards to internal ADUs and the recent changes in legislation, some of the experiences that you see across the country, I looked at both California and also a little bit in New Hampshire. My question for the panel is, with regards to internal ADUs, forget about the market for a second, forget about the new home, build it, that's the appropriate time. Let's just talk about, in general, any kind of internal ADU. There are some really specific building code requirements that go along with internal ADUs if they're to be done legally into code. And maybe the panel doesn't feel quite comfortable talking about this, but some of them, for example, are things like, by code, technically, you really should have 2 different air return systems, right? Like, that's part of the code, which is a cost, an increase in cost, this kind of thing. So my question is, do you think that, given what we've heard today about internal ADUs and maybe the potential of that being a solution, that some of the ways to encourage those or increase maybe the take of that is to also adjust potentially the building requirements that would go along with that?
I'll go first. Yeah. Are we on?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's several questions. I'm going to refrain from rebutting some of the other points brought up by my colleagues up here, but I'm happy to do it any time because I do have some other examples in California where ADUs have run amok. But first of all, your question in regards to the ADUs and whether or not they meet codes. We had a pretty good program in Lehigh City where people would come in and they'd have the inspections. The windows were of the appropriate size. They had a window in every bathroom. There was a separate kitchen. Things like if it was a basement apartment, there was 2 locks on the door. We actually had one gentleman appear in city council one night, and I'm not making this up, and he was very upset because he disagreed with the fact that he should have a lock on both sides of that door that entered into his basement, because he still owned that basement and he had the right to enter that apartment at any time. There are renters' rights, and they have to be protected, and they have to be safe. Those rentals need to be safe, and there need to be inspections. The problem is what we're facing, and I consider this a very big problem, is we do not know where the ADUs are being built because there's no requirement for them to register with the city. If you don't register, you don't get inspected. You might get an inspection if it's part of a new home construction. You know, that's probably going to happen, but that's not what's happening, in our community. I know that's not what's happening in other communities. There's a lot of homes built. Mayor Linden, I was talking to her just about 2 weeks ago, and she was saying we have at least 20% of our homes now have ADUs in them, and those are. If you're not familiar with Linden, Linden is a very, it's uppity community, if you will, right? It's a pretty expensive place to live. These are large homes, and she said well over 20% have ADUs, and they don't know, they're not sure where they're at, and they don't believe they were been inspected. I think that's a problem. I think ADUs have to be registered. I think they have to go through proper inspections, and before anybody moves into them. I think the landowners need to understand, or the landlords need to understand they're running a business, and they need to run it like a business.
Nicole, I haven't heard from the development community that the building code is really a barrier to constructing IADUs. The 2 issues that I heard most frequently, and both were addressed in SB 174 last session, is one, architecture requirements, where this has nothing to do with safety or building code, but cities did not want the IADUs to be visible. So they were requiring some pretty significant architecture investments to basically hide the door or put it on a different side of the house where there really wasn't a reason to do that. And so those have been limited through SB 174. The architecture requirements applicable to any other single family dwelling in the neighborhood is what should be applicable to the IADU. And then the second issue was the definition of an IADU. We had a few cities where even if a garage was connected to the main dwelling unit, they were saying that an IADU in or above the garage was an external ADU and could be prohibited. And we had one situation where they even made a buyer they said that the requirement was connectivity, that there had to be connectivity between the IADU and the house for it to be an IADU, even if it was connected via a wall. So we ended up having to put on plans a door in a master bedroom closet so that there could be flow between the IADU and the main dwelling unit, and that was clarified as well last session. So I don't think that will be an issue going forward, but those were the more common barriers that we saw. It wasn't so much the building code, but other requirements on top of that.
Great, Mayor, thank you. Let's go back to Wilf's question, and you can answer that question with regards to the census.
Okay. In regards to the chart, can I pull it up again real quick so everybody knows what we're talking about there? Is Wilf, I'm going to tell you, I had the very same question when I first seen this. I'm like, and I had to, clarify that with my engineer. Okay, so that's the chart in question, right? Yep. Yeah. So right now, the average family size is generally always larger than the number of actual occupants in the home, and the reason that our ERU calculation is less, and you can see it looks like significantly less, but it's only 0.3 people, right? Is what really has an impact on the flows into the system and effect on the infrastructure is the amount of use, how often it gets used. You don't have everybody in that home showering at the same time. They're not all washing dishes at the same time. They're not using those fixtures. It doesn't matter to me if there's an extra sink put in. I don't care, or an extra toilet or whatever. I really don't care. It's the usage. How often are those toilets getting flushed? How often is the sink being used? How often are they taking showers or baths? Whatever you have, that's the important number. The reason it's less because they don't all do it at the same time. And so the pipe capacity can handle those capacities, and they do it actually fairly, good. And we've been watching this. The Senate Bill 174, that's the one that kind of gave us significant heartburn. And the reason is because we were previously allowed to have 25% of our community without ADUs, and that happened to be exactly how much of our community was built in planned communities. And planned communities were given the maximum number of ERU units based on that calculation right there, that 3.5. So, and then other communities that built other subdivisions, those ERUs were distributed among those. So when 174 came through and they said, okay, well, you don't do this anytime after October 2021, they can now have ADUs. But we didn't have the ERUs to support those. We can't, because that's when those lines are going to cross, and we're gonna have problems. We're going to have surcharges on the system. I hope that answers the question on both those.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so to just wrap up with IADUs for just a minute, if we as a community building partnership, developers and city folks and the folks that live in our cities, we're going to encourage the use of IADUs in order to close this missing middle gap. What would you recommend as a panel? We've done the legislative fix. We have development partners that are offering to build ADUs at the time of new construction, which does seem ideal from a making sure it's done right perspective. So what are other things that we might do as a group that both encourage that, because it does seem as if it's the quickest to market assistance to our problem right now, but also preserve some of the issues that it brings, especially in already higher density areas. Like I think we've all kind of talked about parking kind of is an issue, no matter how you slice it in some cases. And are there things that you would recommend as a panel that we would look to as a group in order to encourage these? Because it seems to me the legislature passed a bill, allowed them, and we're seeing them in some cases and not seeing them in other cases. Are there still more things? Are there still additional steps, and are there still additional wise steps that we need to take in order to encourage the internal ADUs?
Maybe just quickly to address it. So I've kind of, since the legislature allowed that, made that provision, kind of talking around to various communities. Some communities have seen a pretty significant increase in applications for ADUs to be built, IADUs to be built. And to the mayor's point, they really should be permitted. There should be permits required for them. And a number of communities do require that. And a number of them have said that they are seeing quite an uptick in applications for IADU permits. Others have said we're not seeing hardly anything. And I don't know what the difference is, but I have also anecdotally heard from some others saying they're going in without permits. People are just doing it. And so what do you do in that case, and how do you account for that? That's an issue we've got to deal with, I think.
That is a real issue, and that's what I tried to make clear. First of all, from a city standpoint, how many in this room are builders? Just by the raise of hands. How many are planners or work for municipalities? Okay. There's a difference between what you two groups do, okay? Planners, you have to plan for the future. Not only the near future, you have to plan for the far future. Home builders, you're building home, and your task is to create housing for the population, and that's a wonderful task, and it's a wonderful job. Planners, you have an incredible task because you can't look at you can't look about what's going to happen in the next week, the next month, or the next year. You got to consider the impact and the long-term future of how it's going to impact your community. And and Annalise's question about how she couldn't find any communities that were overwhelmed with ADUs, I can tell you one right now is San Diego, because we went down there. I've got a son who lives down there. We took a city tour down there, and we spent 3 days with city planners, and we asked them about their communities. Primarily, we wanted to see how their TODs function, and that's why we went down there. But in the conversation, several times it came up about their infrastructure and about the law that was very similar to House Bill 82. In fact, they look very similar. I wouldn't doubt that Utah's law was modeled after that. They discussed how damaging it was and how they had to raise taxes significantly to rebuild some of the infrastructure to deal for the amount of ADUs that were being occupied. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in a year, but it happened over the series of a decade, to the point that my son, who lives in San Diego, he wouldn't even take his car anywhere, because if he took his car somewhere and come back, there was no place to park it again when he got back in the neighborhood. The real concern that I have is the future, and it's going to happen. I don't think anybody's questioning ADUs are going to increase. They're not going to decrease. We can see that from our numbers. When you ask what's our solution, and this is the million-dollar question, right? I mean, yeah, we need to concentrate, I think, more on just rentals, and we need to find a way that these young people who are looking for homes can build equity. We need to find a way to do it. Mayor Walker's here in the audience, and we've talked about this. We think the limit ought to be on large house size. They ought to be minimized, and people ought to be only allowed to build small homes and not big homes. I'd rather see twin homes by far, separate purchases, or condominiums where kids can actually build equity in those homes instead of creating these rentals and landlords. And that's my personal opinion.
You can ask me a question.
Okay, great. How about if we ask some questions of the audience? Do we have any questions out there in the audience? Great.
It's a long walk over here. So that was my question, was going to be with regard to wealth building. Part of the impetus for putting in the IADU ordinance and SB 174 was to help build wealth through increasing the number of units that were available for rent, and thereby decreasing the rent that was charged to people, because there were more units available for rent, therefore rent goes down, right? Have we seen that? Have you seen that in Lehigh? Have you seen it in any of the communities or places that you're aware of? And if so, what do those rents look like? Presumably, and I think you mentioned, Kim, that the lion's share, or at least half of people were renting to people that they either knew or were related to. Is that right? Like, didn't you say like 51%? So presumably they're charging their family members less than the market rate, presumably, but that's not necessarily the case. If my son moved in with me, yeah, I'm charging the full rent, right? I'm just kidding. Don't, that's not on the record. But so that could have an impact that way. But if people, the rest of the 50% are not renting to people who they're related to, then presumably they would be charging the full market rate to an unknown or strange person, and that wouldn't necessarily help offset the. You see where I'm going with that? Okay, yeah.
I can't answer all. Dead battery. That one's been used too much today. I can't answer all your questions, but you asked me about Lehigh specifically, and so that's why I grabbed the microphone. We do not have the data to be able to provide how rents have increased, but I can say that talking to people that are paying rents, even in ADU rents, those rents are pretty high. And of course it's Lehigh. And so we have a very high demand for that occupancy, and I get it. So I don't really think that, I agree with the argument, anytime you increase supply, the demand's gonna go down and the costs are gonna go down. And that's what we should be seeing. I don't know that we're seeing that right now because the demand is so overwhelmingly high everywhere.
Just a couple comments. The same study that I referenced before from the Turner Institute at Berkeley, they did a study on rents of ADUs, and this is both internal and external, in the Bay Area, and they found that the average was, let me find my number, 62% of the area's median income. So that is quite low. That's impossible for a home builder to meet at this point. There's very, very little housing, as you saw on Dayon's slides from earlier today, in that income range. So that's a very needed range. And so if we can have ADUs, that's by opening up your homes, you're allowing a different type of housing type that's desperately needed in Utah. And then the second thing I would add is for the owner occupant, it's also a big boost because now just in the past year or two, I can't recall the exact date, but now the potential rent from an ADU can be counted when you're going to get a loan. And so a lot of people, especially in today's market with interest rates, are having trouble qualifying. And if you can show that you have an ADU, that rental income is added to your income and can help people who otherwise would not be able to create that equity and be a homeowner access homeownership.
And just real quick, as far as this has been one of my points, is that we've been encouraging higher density, more apartments to be built. We're seeing a lot more being built, and yet the rents don't seem to be coming down. That was kind of lanced a little bit yesterday. I was having a discussion with Chris Gambroulis. I don't see Chris here. But he was talking about what has been happening in downtown Salt Lake City, where he said that there have been a lot of apartments built in Salt Lake City, and that's true. That's been the subject of a national press and podcasts and so on. But the rents are coming down in some of those units because so many of the new units that are being built have lots of amenities. And the rents are staying quite high in those units, but there are other units that have been built that don't have a lot of amenities, and the rents are being lower there because people they want to be in the higher amenity units, not in the lower amenity units. So the lower amenity units are having to kind of lower their rental rates a little bit to try and attract renters. So it's sort of working, but maybe not the way we intended.
Great, thank you. Another question, yeah?
I just had, I'm Gary Crane, Layton City Attorney, and so we have dealt with the same problem, same question, same issue. And I've got to tell you this, that I appreciate Lehigh's willingness to go through what they consider to be a study for impact fees and the things that you've done. But here's the reality. I was up there when they negotiated this thing. And you have legislators on the Hill who see this as being a real potential for adding affordable housing to the state of Utah through this. And everything that we suggested that would have added additional cost to turning your home into an ADU, having an ADU, owner occupied, but ADU, was struck down. And the next year, 174 came as a result of our not doing everything we could to take that price down. Now, hitting impact fees, we've looked at the same issue, and I can tell you this: be careful what you ask for, because one of the suggestions up on the Hill, and when you start to open up impact fees, you open it up for everything. But one of the suggestions on the Hill was, let's do a house-by-house analysis of whether or not there really is an increase. So we take all the ADUs in Layton City, and we take all of the other units in Layton City, and we see if there really is an increase. The expense of just doing that would be incredibly large. That's exactly what they're suggesting when we come up with ideas like, let's just take an average. Let's just take what we think is happening out there. So I'm just saying we got to be careful, very careful what we ask for, because the intent up there on the Hill is that these units provide lower income housing for people that need it. I was talking to Lynn Pace just a second ago, and he has a certain position in the predominant religion in the area. And he said, he says 51% of the LDS church now are essentially single. And he's over a single stake. And I thought about that. It's true. Many of the people that are moving into these less expensive units are either single or they're newly married. Lynn has 8 kids. And when they come together, many of them live at home. I can't remember who it was this morning that was talking about having 10 people in his home right now because of the fact that they're all looking for places to live. And if you think the legislators are not hearing this, they do. They hear it constantly. And they do look to this as being a very, very effective means of lowering the cost of rents. So if one city does something and the rest of the cities aren't doing it, and Layton has looked at this, and we agree with Annalisa in a couple of aspects. One, that it's cyclical over the years, and also cyclical within a home. In other words, the older the area gets, the older the occupants get, and they can have somebody else in the home. But it's cyclical over time. Now we've got new people moving into some of the older homes. But in the overall scheme of things, Layton City is not increasing the use of our sewer service or water service. The only thing we've got a real problem with is parking. And that's going to be perpetual if you allow additional people in the home, whether they're your family members or others. But that's a nuisance. We'll deal with that, a different way through the nuisance ordinances. But I'm just saying, be careful what you ask for, because next year at the legislature, you got 84, you got 174, and next year you'll have another bill.
Great. One more. Yeah. Thanks, Gary.
First, I gotta say I love Gary Crane on the eve of retirement. Those are great comments. I'm a developer, by the way. Anyways, I thought for home ownership to solve the issue, we've had cities that will say yes to condos. That's great. Yes to townhomes. But if you build townhome, but there's this middle product that won't get approved, which is a more narrow townhome that you can own in fee. A lot of builders don't want to build condos because of construction defect litigation. I know it's pretty reduced here in Utah, but still a worry. But the idea of having a smaller unit that's the width of a 2-car garage, where you get rid of the extra 6 feet for the side entry and have no garage, in fact, no covered parking, a product that feels like a condo but you have ownership all the way to the ground is something that we're trying to explore. So I would just suggest, maybe that's just a comment for the masses here, that for planners to be willing to have that middle product that kind of crosses that bridge between the apartment renter, we want to get away from that, so we want ownership, so we think of condos and townhomes, but there's something, in my opinion, that could be better than a condo because you own in fee, and that's something we'll be trying to push ahead with multiple jurisdictions here. So.
Very good. Thank you. Well, I think we made it to time, or we still have some more time, Craig. Is it time for us to wrap up? Oh, okay. Great. Thank you, and thank you to the great panel for being here today. Thanks.